happy to come today to talk. This is a situation that is a black mark on the eyes of individuals who can go wrong. If I can have the first slide, Morgan. Really, it's a story, the next slide, of a co-op student who was truly a bad apple. We get around 200 to 300 co-op students that work inside NASA for 2 or 3 or 4 periods of time. They come back for 1 semester during their college careers. And if we like them and their interests match, we employ about half of them. We had an individual named Thad Ryan Roberts who came in 2000 from the University of Utah. And he had a wild idea that he thought he was above the law, that he could steal something, and he could put an advertisement out on the web. And in this case, he did it in a foreign country in Belgium, thinking nobody would realize it. And if he got any takers to his advertisement, he would steal some lunar samples and try to sell them and benefit. This is truly not the way we as Americans operate. So what happened, the next slide, it all began in September of 2000. Thad and his wife, Katie, who's shown in the image, got a tour of the lunar processing laboratory where all the lunar samples are kept in Houston. Here's the photograph of them. It's a photograph he had taken of himself trying to, quote, play like he was opening the main vault door of that facility. These photographs are from his own website. Next slide. This facility is a unique one. It basically has no windows. It's a vault. It cannot be penetrated, I have to say, with some of the armament that exists in the world today. It's built at high levels so that the flooding should occur from a hurricane in Houston. This building is watertight. The samples are inside cabinets, preserved, and all. So it's a unique facility. There's also adjacent laboratories, next slide, to this building where some of the world's best analytical instrumentation is housed. But in the curatorial facilities are pristine lunar samples, meteorites from Antarctica around the world, interplanetary dust samples, samples from the mission Stardust that collected samples of a comet, the Genesis, special samples collected near the sun, the Japanese spacecraft probe called the Hayabusa, which landed in Australia. All these pristine samples are in this facility. So he had access to it in and out as a co-op student working in the building. Next slide. He got this idea in 2000 after visiting with his wife. He dreamed of getting some lunar samples. Next, Maureen. And in this time, after he returned home in that September visit in 2000, he told his wife, Katie, I think we ought to get some of those samples and sell them. We could pay off our debts, our college loans, and our car, other things. Clearly, this was just a wild idea. And his wife dismissed these and told him to just stop thinking that way. Well, the following year in 2001, he mentioned to 2 of his geology professors at the University of Utah, do you know where I can sell some lunar samples? I may have access to some lunar samples. Well, the professors told him, don't even think about it. This is not there. He returned to Houston in May of 2002. But in March of 2002, he had met a college lad by the name of Gordon McWhorter, who's a former felon. Gordon and Thad, thought and talked about this idea, and they decided that they would put a note out on websites. Next. They put this email up on March the 9th of 2002. Priceless moon rocks now available. Orb Robinson. Well, it's for Roy Orbison. It was his buddy. So this is the name that they generated for Hotmail address. If you have an interest in purchasing a rare and historical significant piece of the moon, would like more information, please contact me by email and have the contact information and expiration of your interest, signed Orb. He sent this out to various sites. One of them was in Belgium, to the Antwerp Mineral Club. And it went out, as you see, in March, and various people saw this. But nobody contacted him until a Belgian fluorescent mineral collector named Axel Immerman. Axel is an amazing individual. He's renowned for his work on fluorescent minerals. These are minerals that fluoresce in ultraviolet radiation. You can see some of them there beside him. Axel saw this advertisement. He knew it was wrong. And after realizing this, he responded on May 14th back to Thad. And he got some responses back, and he knew this was really something that should not be going on. And it's really great that individuals in the world are like Axel Immerman that realize there's a fraud about to be perpetuated on people. He contacted the FBI and says, I think something's going wrong. The FBI took Axel's identity by operating through his website. They began to communicate with Thad Roberts. Clearly, he was doing this because he wanted to repay a debt. He remembered the United States loaning a lunar sample to him in Belgium. Next. Agent Nick Nance, Special Agent Nick Nance, was the individual that was talking to him. He assumed Axel Immerman's identity. So Axel had another person in his life. Nick, a great individual. He was pleased to get off of some nasty crime cases with computer fraud and young sex crime cases and all, but he took to this like a duck does to water. So messages started going back and forth. The supervisor said yes. Later they said we had a case going on which involved lunar samples. We thought it might be a hoax, a fraud. Prices were $1,000 to $5,000 a gram of what the prices that were being offered. Next. Well, as it went on, the emails went back and forth between Nick Nance and Axel. Axel, in this case, they were talking to Thad. Thad said, I have to be cautious in that any deal is handled with delicacy, that I'm not publicly exposed. Remember, this was in April, end of May of 2002. Thad Roberts is sending emails from a variety of locations, University of Utah, a library, also the Johnson Space Center, after he began his tenureship in May of 2002. Next. Well, it began to crystallize. In early May, Thad reported back. He was assigned to the Sonny Carter Training Facility. This is the large immersion facility where astronauts train underwater for missions into space with zero gravity. But on May 10th and 11th, he had met a young lady, and she had a friend. And the young lady that Thad had befriended in the last week of June was named Tiffany Fowler. Tiffany, along with Shay Sire and Thad, began going to Building 31 where the curatorial facility is. Thad went to my laboratory, not to the curatorial facility. Again, he knew I was a lunar sample principal investigator and I had lunar samples, meteorites. He began trying to work a cipher lock, 5-button cipher lock. There's only 232 different combinations of numbers, and eventually you could get the right number somewhere in those 232. After visits over 2 nights, he eventually had the number. These 2 young ladies were with him. On Friday night, the 12th, they went back thinking they were going to open the safe that was inside the room. They did not have the combination to the safe. Well, the safe weighed 600 plus pounds. They had to do something to get it open, to get it out, or do something. They decided to take it out. Well, they didn't have the equipment. They had to go to Walmart, buy a dolly. Next slide. So, they're in this scientific laboratory, not the curatorial facility. And in the lab where they were. Next. So they were in this lab. How did they get into it? They were in a building that was a locked building, in a locked laboratory, in a facility of the Johnson Space Center, which had armed guards and was a national resource. Well, he'd worked there before, so he knew that there's ways that employees go in and out. And he'd worked 2 of his early tenures. He was on his 3rd tenure as a co-op student. The first 2 he'd worked in this building. Well, he went and met some of his old colleagues, and he, under the guise of, I need to process some photographs, can you let me in and use the lab? Well, he got the combination through an outside door, through a padlock, or a security pad. Next. He went inside the building. They went down the hall. They turned. They go down the second hall, down here the next. They come to a laboratory that has a cipher lock on the door, which is my laboratory, 5-button cipher lock. You use probabilities. I'm telling you this. Don't try to do it now because it's all been changed. Okay, next. So, once they got inside, they'd been in there the night before. Here was the safe. This is the actual photograph of my safe taken with his camera. He took the photograph of the safe in the lab before he stole it. Next. They had the dolly, which they had acquired from Walmart. Next. So how did they do it? A young man and a young lady, one of the two ladies got cold feet and stayed outside with a radio so that she could report the police might be coming and alert them. The National Geographic reenacted this with two actors, and you're going to see the two actors through this. You know, Tiffany and Thad are played by two great people. George is a wonderful guy. 3 trips to Iraq, a sniper, 34 confirmed kills of bad guys. Amazing guy. He's acting now in his career. Next. So he went to the laboratory, and yes, they can move the safe on the dolly. Next. They moved it on out. So they opened the door, loaded it in the back of a borrowed Jeep Cherokee. Thad had told a friend he needed to borrow a Jeep Cherokee because he's moving his apartment to another location. Could he put his stuff in it and move it? Next. So they got the safe in the back of the Cherokee. Next. They drove out the main gate of the Johnson Space Center with cameras, videotaping them up here. The vehicle sloped down. The guards never stopped them. What did they do next? Next. Thad, in his testimony, said, on the night of July 13th, I took my girlfriend and a friend and came out with a whole 5-drawer cabinet safe and the whole safe. Next, he goes to Motel 6. Next. Oh, back up, Morgan, one if you can. Notice the 2 double bed rooms. He takes this double bed, takes it apart, stands it against the wall. Next slide. Here's my safe, again taken with his camera. My safe standing here, and here's the dolly over on the side, and there's the wheel. They moved it in, the bed standing on the wall, and they began to work taking the safe apart. And what I'm going to tell you next and show you, don't go try to do. Next. They began to gather tools and equipment to go and open this with power tools, etc. They opened it, they took it apart, they put the drawers of the safe after they emptied them in one dumpster and the frame of the safe in another dumpster in a different city. And what were they doing and how did they do it? Next slide. To get into a safe, it's actually fairly simple when you have the combination. But they didn't. So on a safe of this type, there's a metal flange. They bent it back. And there's a 1-inch hardened steel bolt that goes into the sides of the safe. They cut this bolt. How did they cut it? Next slide. With proper tools, you can see how you can do it. This is during the reenactment. National Geographic purchased a perfectly good safe. They opened it and they destroyed it. Next. And inside the safe, after getting it open, they looked in, they saw not only lunar samples, there were 50-some lunar samples and 150 meteorites, including 8 Martian meteorites. 101 grams of lunar material was at their disposal. Now they had it open. These are the actors, Tiffany and Shay, with Thad looking at what they had. Next. Inside each lunar sample, I had put the history together on forms inside Teflon bags and all that told the history of the sample, how much weight I got, what I had done with it, how much remaining, how much of the sample had been destroyed in a state that another investigator could use it, but it was not really trash. But trash was a term that Thad used to claim that all these samples were trash and they were not being used, and he was justified to take them and sell them. No, Thad, it's not that way. Next. Now, These samples, as I said, had original material. They had material that I'd utilized. I degraded in some manner, but the material could be used by other investigators in the program. And there was a very small bit, maybe 20%, were in a state that had been difficult for another investigator to use. That trash is not a term we use for all the sample, but it's one that's been degraded to a state that would be difficult for somebody to use routinely, but it can be used. Next. So, in the safe were the notebooks of all of my scientific observations over 32 years.
Wow.
If you're going to be working on scientific samples, you want to keep them in a safe place, the notebooks and observations. What better than a safe? In a secure room, in a secure building, on a secure site. Not when you have a bad apple. These notebooks were quite precious. Next. As I emptied the contents of the safe, one drawer on the floor here, these are their photographs out of their camera. Another drawer up on the bed. Here are some of my green notebooks. Here are some of my green notebooks up here. Thad Roberts, in all his testimony, and to this day, reported that he'd never had any green notebooks of mine. These are his own photographs. Next. This is early in the morning of Sunday after they'd stolen things on Saturday night the 13th, and the 14th they got the safe open, and they began rapidly communicating with Axel, which turned out to be the FBI, that they had something that they wanted to talk about. Senior scientist that worked with me for 20 years named Rick Saki comes in the lab on Monday morning, realizes the safe was missing. He calls the authorities. The hunt was on. People could not understand why the safe was missing in a secure room, in a secure building. NASA released information that the media that we had samples that were missing. The media accused us of not knowing anything for 3 days because we released it on Monday afternoon that samples stolen on Saturday. Why didn't NASA know they were stolen on Saturday? Well, they were in a building, and Rick, as soon as he got in, turned it in. I was out of the country. Next. I was on a lecture tour attending a scientific meeting in Australia. My wife and I get this 4 o'clock in the morning phone call, which you never want to receive. Phone goes off. I answered it. My words were, "What?" I just could not believe that the safe in my laboratory had been stolen. I was ordered to return to Houston. Next. So I came back, and during this time, negotiations were going on between Orb, i.e. the fake Thad Roberts, and Axel, the fake Nick Nance. So aliases were being used. And it was decided that they would get together the following Saturday for a sale. And they decided to have the sale in Orlando, Florida. Strange place. No, Axel had a sister who lived on the East Coast, and Axel couldn't come to the United States. Remember, Axel could not come because the FBI was playing Axel. So they decided to have his sister and her husband arrive to make the sale with Orb, or Thad Roberts. So the FBI had to assume disguises, and so they decided to meet in Orlando for the sale. Next. So on Wednesday of that week, still NASA, the FBI, the Office of Inspector General, nobody knew the identity of who they were talking with. The Houston cops and the FBI were working a case of a stolen safe. The people in Florida who had been working on the telephone back to a prospective buyer on some fraudulent samples, i.e. Orb Robinson, were in Florida. On a conference call on Wednesday, the 2 female lead investigators put 2 and 2 together and realized that Orb was going to be buying samples from the stolen safe in Houston. An amazing, nice piece of detective work that they put this together and through this telephone. Orb was the thief, but who was he? Nobody knew who Orb was. Next. So, this thief on Friday afternoon, when he was getting ready to drive to Florida, he sends a stupid email. The thief returns to the scene of the crime, remember. He sends an email to the curator. Says, "Is it true that 60 pounds of lunar samples missing or has been displaced?" Thad. The curator was out of town. He didn't respond. Yes, yay. So Thad and his girlfriend get in the car and drive all night to Florida. His colleague, the felon from Utah, Gordon McWhorter, was going to meet him. Next. So they drive to Orlando, check into the Sheraton Hotel. While they were there, we'll get to other things in a minute. It was decided that the buyers and the sellers would meet in the Italianis restaurant on International Drive in Orlando at 6 p.m. The Italianis restaurant closed. Another company came in, Bola came in. It also closed, so the restaurant must have a bad history about it. Next. So, while Thad and Tiffany were waiting for the meeting with the FBI, supposedly they laid the samples out on the bed. And the book by Ben Mesrick reports that they laid the samples out on a blanket and made whoopee on top of the samples while Gordon was coming in from the airport. Now, this is a story that has mixed and possible other alternatives, and you'll see near the end when I say what might have happened also. Next. So, the meeting occurred. The buyers, who were actually two FBI agents, Axel's brother and sister-in-law from Pennsylvania. They were going to drive to Florida in a Jaguar, green Jaguar. They got road ground on it, and his sister-in-law was Lynn Billings. Her husband was Lawrence Wolfenden. Lynn was a geologist that the FBI had in Sarasota, Florida. She came over and took the role because she knew something about rocks. Her husband said, I know nothing about rocks, but I can sure take this guy down if I have to. Well, so this car met there, and they met in this restaurant. They were purchasing the rocks for Axel, who, quote, could not come to the United States. Next. Now, they met in the Italianis restaurant at 6 o'clock. The only people in the restaurant were the good guys, except when they walked in. Tables had been wired for sound. The waiters were law enforcement officials, the cashier, etc. The main lead was wired, Lynn, but unfortunately the Muzak was being turned on accidentally, and they had difficulty getting the conversations. Next. After a while, they decided to get him outside. They took him outside, and an unbelievable thunderstorm was going on. There was an aircraft circling the site to videotape it from the top and see that the people did not escape. They got him out, put him in two different vehicles, went to the Sheraton Hotel where the samples were, and in the parking lot of the Sheraton, they took him down. Yay for the good guys. Well, at that time, two of them began to talk. They had to have a search warrant to go in the hotel room where the samples were. They had to wait hours and hours and hours for a search warrant. Eventually, one was delivered and they got the samples. Next. At this time, Special Agent Patty Searle, who's shown here, was the one who took Thad down and said, I love putting my knee in the spine of his back as I cuffed him. Patty is a neat lady. Next. Her team were 5 of the 28. These are really the good guys and gals. Next. Now, until they were arrested, the government officials had no idea who we were dealing with. We did not know if we were dealing with a cartel, the mafia, or what. The idea that we were dealing with a college co-op who did this, blew everybody's mind when these were arrested. Next. And they were just out to make some easy money. If you ever seen a federal warrant for arrest, here's a copy of one. Hope you never see one. But it tells what they're being arrested for. Next. They did this, as it turned out, on the anniversary of Apollo 11. On the 33rd anniversary of man stepping on the moon on July 20th. Next. The 3 characters, Ryan Thad Roberts, Gordon McWhorter, the previous felon, and Thad's girlfriend, who he met at the end of June, Tiffany Fowler. 28 agents, 12 vehicles, and 1 airplane were involved in the takedown. Thad said he did it for love of Tiffany entirely. He only met her 3 weeks earlier. This had started back in 2000. This is 2002. So clearly this individual was scheming devious character. Next. A fourth individual did not go to Florida. She's the lady who refused to go inside the building on the night the samples were stolen, Shay Sire. Shay was arrested the next morning in Houston. Next. I received a phone call. I'd been back from Australia. Turns out they did not want to talk to me. I said, back in town. I'm ready to help you. No, we don't want to talk to you. I had no idea all this was building for the arrest in Florida and the two ladies putting the case together and the cell in Florida. So they called me into this building for an hour and a half. I was interrogated. Interesting experience. 8 people around a table with a camera and a tape recorder. So eventually they realized, you're not involved. Well, I knew that. But next, they showed me the frame of the safe. Here's the frame of the safe that was pulled out of a dumpster with the missing 5 drawers. We never found the 5 drawers. They put it in another dumpster, which had been picked up by a landfill vehicle and hauled off. Next. Well, in the samples that were collected were 150-some meteorites. They had been taken to Beaumont and placed in a boat storage shed that belonged to Shay Sire. There are these samples. Next. The samples that were collected in Florida, the FBI released a photo of the samples in the fishing tackle box and the suitcase, and these ones that recovered. Well, did we recover everything? Next. I had to fly to Florida on the next morning, and all this publicity was going out that the 4 had been charged in connection to this priceless rocks, and it was on newspapers all around the world. This happens to be just a copy from Grand Rapids newspaper. The 3 mugshots and the 4th lady in Houston arrest. Next. Gene Cernan made a comment. I don't understand where they were coming from and how they thought they were going to get away with selling moon rocks. It just doesn't take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of stupidity to do what they did, quite frankly. I agree with Gene. Next. So, I went to Florida. I looked at these samples. All of them had been recovered, fortunately, because I'd had alternate records and placed it in another place. But the samples had been contaminated. They held them in their hands. One of them said he ate the samples. We don't know what else they did with them. There were samples of talc from Teflon gloves on the samples because they put them out and played with them. So the scientific value was degraded. Now they can be used for educational purposes and other things of this type. So we do have other uses for them, and we'll use them. Next. So the samples then were there. Now, what was Thad's background? Where did he come from? He came out of Utah. He was a Mormon. He had been raised by a family, and then he rejected his faith later in his teens. He worked for 2 scientists on a petrology project. That's mixing powders and putting in a furnace and seeing if you can make a rock. He also worked in the curator's office on a Mars sample return project. But he claims he was an astrophysicist. Well, he was never an astrophysicist when he worked with us. And he was a summer co-op doing a assigned task. And then he was sent to the Sonny Carter for his 3rd appointment, where he trained people and worked on the interface between the customer and NASA as people worked in this water immersion facility. He knew how to get in this building 31 where the samples were. And in previous times, I had shown Thad and his wife, Katie, lunar samples when he asked me if I would show them to him during one of her visits. So he knew samples were around and all. In fact, there's an image of me on his website of showing the 2 of them a sample. Next. So, he wanted to be an astronaut. He was a triple major, one of these overachievers. He was working on a bachelor's in physics, geology, and geophysics at the University of Utah. He had a private license, scuba diver. He always said he wanted to be an astronaut. His buddy Gordon McWhirter, who he met at University of Utah, had quick get-rich schemes, schemes to make money rapidly. But Gordon got into an argument with his uncle. He told him he was going to make money from selling lunar samples. The uncle said, no, you're not. This is against the law. One thing led to another one. Assault charges were filed by his uncle when he assaulted him by picking up a bow and arrow and firing an arrow at the uncle. So he was under an indictment. He was a previous fella. He had this attempted assault there. Roberts had developed this affair with this other co-op student, Tiffany Fowler, 3 weeks or so before the theft. His wife, Katie, had already told him that she was leaving him because of this. Tiffany worked in a cell biology lab. Shay worked in the structure and engineering thermal design area at the time of the arrest. So these were all, except Gordon, smart kids that just truly took the wrong path. Next. Now, if you're going to prosecute somebody, you have to know what the value of the material is. How do you place a value on the returned lunar sample? This is the problem that the government had. Next. It turns out there had been a sale of actual lunar samples that the Russians had collected on their automated probes that went to the moon. They had 3 probes that landed on the moon. They collected soil samples. They brought them back. And they gave a scientist named Koryaev 3 samples from each of those, or 1 sample from each of those 3 missions. And when he died, his family had it, and they needed funds to live on. So his widow offered it to Sotheby's in London, who put it up for sale. Next. So this collection of 3 grains that were right here inside this container sold for $442,500. That's $2,200 per milligram. Per milligram. We had 101 grams. Next. So you put information on this and you come out with some numbers. Cost of the Apollo buildings, things of this type, not salaries. And if you do it from the Sotheby's number, you get $233 million heist. That's the largest heist in the history of the United States until Bernie Madoff came along.
Wow.
And people did not realize, what I did, because my backside was on the line on this. Next. So the value the government then had to set was they agreed to something between $7 and $32 million, what was going to be the charge. It went before a judge, and she's a very interesting judge, Judge Ann Conway. One of her cases was Hooters versus Kerr Winghouse. And you read the decision, and it says the ruling makes clear that Hooters does not own the sole rights to use attractive girls dressed in tight shorts and tank tops to serve chicken wings. The intellectual property law gives Hooters ownership of its name and owl logo, but not the ownership of a marketing concept based on the use of attractive females. Very interesting. She was also one of the leaders on the use of DNA as fingerprints in cases, and we now know where that has led to. Next. So they were up for trial. The 2 girls pled guilty very quickly for possession, illegal interstate transport, and possession of lunar samples. Next. Gordon McWhirter. Gordo, being a one-time felon and had an indictment over him, knew that if he was convicted on this, he was a 3-time loser. He was going up for life. He had a problem. So he was supposed to show up for trial in Florida. We were all there. Morgan and I were there ready for testimony. He did not show up. Marshals put out a warrant for his arrest. Next. He was in Utah. His mother had put up her home for the bond, her home in the Carolinas. Flyers were placed around. He was a singer in coffee shops in Provo, Utah area. So the flyers revealed he showed up at a coffee shop, changed his appearance, dressed completely in black, black fingernails, dyed his hair, etc. FBI got the call. They went in and they arrested him. Well, he claimed they arrested him in the stall of the female restroom. He claimed that he had come in from the desert and he was Job, clearly setting up a psycho defense. Well, that didn't last very long. Next, the federal marshals, they got through that, and the Con Air people brought him back to Florida for the trial. Next. So he was there. During this trial, Thad had pled guilty. Gordo pled not guilty, so we had to convict Gordon McWhirter. The appearance of my notebooks came forward. For the first time, really, the media got a hold of it. They were there. And it created quite a bit of excitement with the media of all these old records. Next. One of the FBI agents said during the trial, this gang might have had the highest IQ, but the least common sense in history. And that's probably very true. Next. McWhirter commented when he was found guilty that I used the internet for 2 hours and got six years in prison. I'm not a terrorist, but a college kid who got caught in a glorified fraternity prank. No, this is not a fraternity prank. You're insisted in stealing national treasures, and it's not a college prank. And my work was disrupted. Next. Thad. The judge was not happy with Mr. Roberts. After leading the two ladies down the path of immoral acts and Gordon, she took his guilty plea to the harshest. She asked me to testify. And here was my chance to really say something to him. And I thought about this kind of long and hard. And I wanted it to hit home with him. And I'm going to read the testimony, which is very short, of what I gave to the judge in the court. As an employee of the United States government, of NASA, and as a research scientist, I would like to note that in 1969, some very brave individuals went to the moon and began collecting lunar samples, samples that are our national treasures. They've been worked on in research labs and projects, viewed by the public around the world with pride. It hurts me a lot to know that one individual would want to take it upon themselves to steal one of the samples and benefit from it financially, knowing that it has hurt a large number of people, it's hurt our nation. Know that we have one amongst us who's working as an intern or co-op in our laboratories that broke our trust. I as a scientist have been hurt deeply. I as an American citizen are deeply moved and shaken by these actions which occurred. It hurts me deeply. Thank you. That was all I said. I could have had 30 minutes. It struck home with the judge. She doubled the sentence that was recommended for Thad Roberts. It was 47 to 52 months. She sentenced him to 100 months in federal prison. Yay. He appealed and got it reduced to 90 months because he testified against his cohort, Gordon McWhorter. So he spent 90 months in prison. Next. The press release said that Thad had gotten 100 months. Next. During his plea, he noted that he also admitted to stealing dinosaur bones, fossils, gems from state museums and national parks in Utah, from museums, the school in Utah. They were all found in his home. His wife, Katie, noted that she didn't know where they came from. Now, Katie divorced him. His girlfriend, Tiffany, rejected Thad's attempt to communicate with her. She completed a master's in botany and biology, and she actually was working on a PhD in biology here at Texas A&M as up until last year. Next. Thad got to spend his time in Supermax, a location for him to go to. This is in Colorado, outside of Florence, with the shoe bomber and a few other people. But he was in the administrative medium security part, but he was at least, we can say he was in Supermax until 2009. Next. Roberts, while he was there, he said, I didn't think of the ramifications of all this, but he shared fantasies of making money. Well, it's that way. Now, he was released in January of 2009. Next. And he's out. His buddy Gordo. Gordo spent his time in the Federal Mental Hospital in Fort Worth. He was released and returned to Salt Lake City. He married. He has one son. His uncle requested the aggravated assault charges be dropped because he served time in prison. He's recently charged with domestic violence, which has been dropped. He's currently counting trees in southwestern Utah for a contractor. Next. In summary, Thad got originally 100 months, reduced to 90. He has 3 years probation, drug testing, $7,000 fine. Gordon is 72 months. Tiffany got 6 months home confinement, and Shay, they got 36 months probation and $7,000 fine. They did not get time in the federal jail. I wish personally they probably deserved it. Next. Now, Special Agent commented, this unfortunate stunt may have ruined the futures of 4 people who, if they had chosen a different path of action, might have gone to contribute to an honest lunar sample return mission. And that's true. Next. Who are the good guys and the bad that arrested these? Here are the law enforcement guys and gals that put them up. Patty is here. Her counterpart in Houston, Sheila Brock, is over here. These are the two ladies that put it together. Nick Nance, who did the Axel, his role's there. Next. Now, you've heard about what happened to the thieves. What happened to the good guy, Axel Immerman? It's very interesting, the Belgian. Next. Axel was rewarded for his acts. He got an Apollo 16 photograph signed by astronaut John Young, who went to the moon. These are kind of rare. He was given a Belgian flag that was flown to the moon on Apollo 16, a little small 3-inch by 4-inch flag, Belgian flag. International Astronomical Union named an asteroid for him. This is quite an honor. FBI gave him recognition, his mineral club gave something, but I think the neatest thing is Axel came out with a lunar rock. Because there are lunar samples that have been collected on the Earth from some of the desert regions, and a mineral collector that had some gave Axel a 3-gram sample of a lunar rock. And I think that's really cool. Next. Now, his story is written up in a mineralogical magazine, and the Big E, Axel, next. So, Thad's sentence is greater than everybody with the Enron situation except Jeffrey Skilling, who got 200 months. But while Thad was in prison, he was contacted by one of the officials of Chipotle Restaurants. Chipotle Restaurants guy wanted to get Thad's story so he could sell it. Thad agreed to this. Next. He sold it to the author Ben Mesrick. Ben Mesrick wrote a book. So when Thad was locked up, I wrote some notes down, and these are comments that I thought about Thad Roberts. That, I'm positive we've not heard the last of him. He's somebody who will attempt to profit from his crime, and he can do that now because the Son of Sam law says if he served his federal time, he can then afterwards go and do whatever he wants. So he's now beginning to do that. His ego is too large, and he'll not go away. And he's changed the way, this is sad, the way we look at co-ops and interns, because we look at them because, is that one going to do something behind my back? And we got to give them assignments, or we make them work in pairs or things of this type. So it's there. Next. So Thad was one, he must realize he can never vote. He's a felon. He can never work for the government, state or local, never work for a government contractor, never receive a scholarship on government money. His dream of being an astronaut in the space program is probably shot. Also, next, he cannot be a caregiver, certified teacher, commercial pilot's license, never own a firearm. But the bottom of all this is he can still run for public office. Next. Now, thing that we have to remember is theft is serious stuff. The punishment can be severe. It's changed again, as I said, our views of co-ops and interns, and that's sad. Thad has aged over the years. Now, he's claimed that he gave the rock for Tiffany, his girlfriend. Well, we know that's not true. He's had this plan earlier. Next. He's out on the lecture circuit. My gosh. He spoke at a TEDx at University of Colorado. He was speaking on a motivational talks under Kepler Speakers Bureau. Follow your dreams, etc. But let me tell you this. Word got on this, and a few of our brave astronauts heard about this and went to Kepler Speakers Bureau, and he's no longer a Kepler speaker. Next. So, we know he'd been taking things for a long period of time. Smooth talker, and he's not a folk hero. And he's a convicted felon. Next. So this is coming out. Things are happening. The book was released by Ben Mesrick in July called Sex on the Moon. Kevin Spacek has bought the movie rights to this. Thad will be portrayed as a folk hero. As I said, he was dropped from the Speakers Bureau. Next. Now, in February of 2010, I'd been contacted by Ben Mesrick to write his book, Sex on the Moon. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't think it was right. So he came to the Johnson Space Center and went around as a tourist getting information, and it was written up in the book, which was released on July 20th. Now, this is not all true. It's his own spin on this. It's false information. It's a story that Thad told. Next. We know the book, Sex on the Moon, and the next one is the hard copy cover by author Mesrick. Mesrick has written Facebook, 21, various books that have been very big bestsellers. but there's problems with some of these. Next. Now, in this case, he used the title Sex on the Moon that, they used these Apollo samples and made whoopee on them. That's where the title comes from. Next. So, but Mesrick is known for putting his own spin on things. An example, next slide, the Mark Zuckerberg, who you heard of Facebook, that's going to be billionaire coming out. In Mesrick's story of Zuckerberg, at a lecture in Stanford, points out very clearly the facts are not what happened. So I think we have to take this as fact. Realizing the movies had bought the Sex on the Moon book from Mesrick. Next. The producer says he wants to marry two topics, lunar heist and sex. And he says that Mesrick is a subversive talent and he's an anarchist. So we have to be careful what's going on here. Next. Mesrick is around. He wants to portray people as heroes. No, Mr. Mesrick, next. These people are not heroes. They're not folk heroes. They're felons. They've tarnished our nation. Next. Thad is making the rounds of the film circle. Kevin Spacek and Jim Parsons, The Big Bang. Next. When Mesrick had his book opening, he's in Boston. So this guy's getting around. Next. The movie. What should happen? Axel sent me this. Axel says if they cast the movie, he wants to cast like this. He has a set of characters that from various ones. And I said, well, okay, if you're going to do that, I'm going to throw my list out. And the next one is I either play myself or let Harrison Ford play me. I haven't decided which. But this is our dream cast. Well, anyhow, it's forthcoming. We know something is happening. They have not begun to write the story yet. Next. Bloomberg Business Daily. In July, had a story about stupid intern acts, things that interns have done that are just absolutely crazy off the wall, from Monica Lewinsky all the way down to Thad Roberts, who's the number one. And so this is clearly the number one act. Next. As I told you, Sunday night, March 4th, National Geographic production. Interviews with a large number of the principals, filmed on various locations. As I said, I'm telling you this before so you'll have a handle on what's going to be happening should you choose to see it. Next. Now after this, the film crew went around. Here they are with astronaut Jack Schmitt when they were in New Mexico. There. Other things have happened. This is a never-ending story. It's a dead horse that just will not go away. Next. Gordon told us after the fact that the arrival times in Florida, while the samples were being moved to Florida and they were going to have the sale, that the book should not be Sex on the Moon. It should be Sex in the Shower. Because he said the bed was not messed up, and the FBI records also show the bed's not messed up. So I don't know what title you're going to use. But next. Also, I was shocked in October to receive a 7-page handwritten letter from Shay Sire asking forgiveness of what she had done and disrupted my research and other things. And I accepted the letter and told her I accepted her apology because I felt it was a heartfelt letter that she wrote. Next. We know also that the film people are after us. They're talking to NASA management wanting to film this. I have some real problems. I have a problem with people making money off of crimes. And I think most Americans do also. But there's a chance it may be turned into a comedy. But there's plenty of funny things in this. And so we'll have to just wait and see. Now, with that, next. I've told you this story, and the bottom line is how to steal a moon rock. Don't. Unless you want 7 to 10 in federal prison and all. After we talk, and there's some time, I brought 2